Ohio. Ukraine, the state in East and partially Central Europe. The territory with an internationally recognized borders C-603,549 km. The population by estimates of Public Service of Statistics of Ukraine for September 1, 2020, 41,554,361 permanent residents and 41,723,998 people of actual population. Takes the 34th place in the world on population, the 44th in territory. Ukraine is the first in size of the territory, the European state which entirely is in Europe. The capital, Kiev. A state language, Ukrainian. Ukraine, the unitary state and the parliamentary and presidential republic. The president's position since May 20, 2019 is held by Vladimir Zelensky, the prime minister since March 4, 2020, Denis Shmyhal. The country is subdivided into 27 administrative and territorial units, 24 of which are areas, 1 the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. C and 2 represent the cities of the state submission. Kiev, Sevastopol C. Borders on Belarus in the north, Poland, Slovakia and Hungary in the west, Romania and Moldova in the southwest, Russia in the east, the northeast and, de facto, the south. In the south and the southeast it is washed black and Azov by the seas. Has sea borders with Romania in the Black Sea and with Russia in Black and Azov. The part of internationally recognized territory of Ukraine is controlled self-proclaimed the DD and LPR, a part Russia. The Crimean Peninsula F. The most part of believers professes Orthodoxy. There are also adherents of Catholicism and a Greco-Catholicism and also Judaism and Islam. The DD volume for 2020 calculated at par purchasing power. PPS was $543.8 billion. $13,033.3 per capita. Nominal DDD the same year was $151.5 billion. $36.31 per capita. Occupying on DDD indicator per capita. Nominal and on PPS. The last place in Europe. Monetary unit hryvnia. WO. Independence of the country of the USSR, which I was Federal Republic Ukraine since December 1922, is proclaimed on August 24, 1991. The continuer of state national traditions and the right successor of UN, the state, the successor of USSR, Sopravypreemniets of CCC, the co-founder of the Union, the CISIS, GUAM, OCHAS and other international organizations, is in association with the European Union. According to the existing international treaties and conventions, has the simplified access to the Black Sea passages, carries out research activity in Antarctica and peacekeeping activity in Drive Congo, Kosovo, South Sudan, the region of Abyei and Transnistria. According to the most authoritative and widespread version including in Ukraine, the name of the state comes from an Old Russian word. Ukraina, boundary region, which was initially applied to the different boundary lands of Russia and Old Russian principalities. As it is reported in Brockhaus and Efron's dictionary at the end of the 16th century, southwest Russia as a part of Grand Duchy of Lithuania was included into the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. the part of her territory stretching from Podolia in the west to the mouth of Dnieper, the Ochakov field in the south, and including the most part of lands of future Ekaterinoslавski province in the east, began to be called informally in this state as Ukraine. It was connected with border location of these territories in the Polish state. Thus, in the 16th-18th centuries, Ukraine becomes the name of the concrete geographical region among names of other historical and ethnographic regions. Volhynia, Podolia, Pokoti, Severshana, Chervonia Russia, Zaporizhia. It is assigned to the central Dnieper bank, the southern Kyiv and Bratslashchina, the territory controlled by Cossacks. Inhabitants of this territory began to be called Ukrainians or Ukrainic. The geographical, but not ethnic binding of this concept is shown by the fact that Ukrainians called also a slushily Polish Shliata in these territories. The number of Ukrainians gradually grew, and the name Ukraine extended to regions outside the initial territory. At the time of Khmelnytsky's revolt, it began to be applied in relation to all territory where there took place military operations. The concept was used in written sources and in works of folklore. Both Bogdan Khmelnytsky and his successors used him. It, however, didn't extend to all South Russian lands and didn't become the name of the state. After the Androsovsky Truce, 1667, which divided Ukraine across Dnieper in the use, the names Segobotny Ukraine, Togobotny Ukraine and Little Russian Ukraine appear. Since the 18th century, the concept Ukraine is used in geographical sense and is well known on an equal basis with name Malorussia. 184 In process of growth of national consciousness, the importance of the concept Ukraine increased, and the word began to be perceived not only as the geographical term, but partly and as the name of ethnic space. It became especially noticeable by the end of the 19th century. 186. At the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, the term Ukraine as the name of all ethnic territory became completely independent and self-sufficient, having forced out other self-names which were used only at the regional level since then. 186. During fight of the Ukrainian national movement against Little Russian identity, it began to compete also with the official and church term Malorussia, having forced Artemis final in the 1920th years in connection with Bolshevist policy of indigenization and Ukrainization. Some Ukrainian historians and linguists put forward the version that the name Ukraine comes from the word edge, Kraina, that is just country, the earth occupied by the people. The expert in the history of the Russian culture S. Semin in work in Ukraine. Exception of the general rule. Published in the Ras magazine, Russian Speech. 2012, No. I showed that writing in Ukraine and in Ukraine was used in Russian as equal from the middle of the 17th century. Revolutionary events of the beginning of the 20th century led to the fact that designs neutral before were filled with ideological sense. In Ukraine, it began to be perceived as underlining of sovereignty of the republic that didn't fit into a framework of national policy of the USSR. Therefore, the design in Ukraine became the only standard writing during the Soviet era. Ukraine is located in the southeast part of Europe, within the East European plain. The territory of the Republic in her internationally recognized borders makes 603,549 km. What corresponds to 5. 7% of the territory of Europe and 0.44% of the territory of the world. The 44th place on the area among the countries of the world and the first among the countries which entirely are in Europe. G. Control of Ukraine over the Crimean Peninsula and parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions was lost in 2014. Almost all territory of the Crimea, except for the north of the Arabatsky area, which is since 1954 the territory of the Kherson region, is controlled by Russia. See annexation of the Crimea to the Russian Federation. And certain districts of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions are controlled self-proclaimed the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic respectively. The territory of Ukraine and her internationally recognized borders C has the sizes of 1316 km from the west on the east and 893 km from the north on the south. Also 45 lies approximately between 52 northern latitude, both 22 AE and 41 AE east longitude. Extreme northern point, the village Gremyok, the Novgorod-Seversk district of the Chernihiv region, southern the Cape Buzzard. The Sevastopol region. By other estimates, Nikolay Cape, on 3.1 km to the east of the Cape Buzzard. C. Western, the village of Solomanovo near the city S of the Transcarpathian region, east, the village Arliz or Luhansk regions. The geographical center of Europe on the measurements taken in 1887 by the Defense Ministry of Austria-Hungary and also the Soviet scientists after World War II, is located in the territory of modern Ukraine, near the city of Rakov of the Transcarpathian region, though, on other calculations, also points in other states apply for this rank. Ukraine is in zones of the pine and mixed woods, the forest steppe and the steppe. To the north from a Chernozem belt grey forest and cespitose and podzolic soils under the mixed woods, to the south, dark chestnut and chestnut soils under dry steppes are widespread. The forest zone includes the various mixed and deciduous woods with a white fir, a pine, a beech and an oak. In a forest steppe zone of the wood, generally oak, and herbs and tape forestations are characteristic of a steppe zone. Ukraine has official border with 7 member states of the Union. In the east, the northeast and actually in the south. The Crimean side. With Russia in the north, with Belarus, in the west with Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, in the southwest with Moldova. A part is controlled by the unrecognized Nestor Moldavian Republic. And Romania. Coastline extent -2835 km. Total length of internationally recognized borders is 6992 km. Length of sea border is 1355 km. Across the Black Sea -1056.5 km. Across the Sea of Azov -249.5 km. Length of overland border -5637 km. The relief of the most part of the territory has flat character. Lowlands occupy 70%, and heights and mountains -25% and 5% respectively. Mountains are in the west. The Ukrainian Carpathians, the highest point, Mount Hoverla, 2061 m above sea level. And the south. The Crimean Mountains, the highest point, the mountain Roman Kosh, 1545 m above sea level. Main lowlands. In the south, the Black Sea lowland, in the north, Polisia, in the center, Dnieper, in the west, Transcarpathian. In the south of Ukraine, in the territory of the Kherson region, there is one of the biggest sandy massifs in the territory of Europe, Oleshkovsky Sands. In all territory of Ukraine, climate, moderately continental, degree of continentality grows in the direction from the west to the east and increases with increase in annual amplitude of air temperature. The greatest continentality characterizes east regions of Ukraine. For the Carpathians, the mountain type of climate is characteristic of the territory of the Crimea, subtropical climate of the Mediterranean type. Summer in all territory of Ukraine long, warm or hot. The average temperature of July is +18, 24 C. The winter strongly depends on the region. Average temperature fluctuates from 8 C up to +2 - 4 C. The soft winter is observed in the south and the west of the Republic. The coldest winters are observed in the northeast. The average annual amount of precipitation makes 600, at the same time considerably differing depending on the region. In the Carpathians drops out up to 1600 of rainfall a year, in the south and the southeast of 400, 300. The nature of Ukraine differs in a considerable variety. While Ukraine occupies less than 6% of the space of Europe, in the country about 35% of the all-European biodiversity, thanks to existence of several natural zones and passing across her territory of migration ways of many animal species are presented. The soil and vegetable zonality is well expressed. The combination of three natural zones is characteristic. Forest, steppe and steppe. Flora of Ukraine contains more than 27,000 plant species, and the fauna is more than 45,000 animal species. Taking into account the geographical location of Ukraine and different degree of familiarity the person of her regions, the ecological situation in the country is non-uniform, however in general tends to deterioration, first of all in connection with almost universal expansion of economic activity. The main problems in this area are the growing volume of atmospheric emissions of greenhouse gases, Massachusetts data of the woods, air pollution and water's waste of industrial production, the growing consumption of fresh water. Huge damage to the environment is caused by the wildfires which are periodically covering significant areas. Not only disappearance of considerable masses of vegetation together with the animals living in them, but also smoke of settlements turns out to be their consequence. In the territory of Ukraine there are areas with an adverse ecological situation, Donetsk coal and Kryvyi iron ore pools, the district of Chernobyl. Since the end of the 20th century the power implement a number of programs for restriction of harmful effects of industrial and agricultural activity on the environment, however they, as a rule, give limited effect. Thanks to the security measures which are often undertaken in cooperation with MSOP and other profile international structures, it was succeeded to stop reduction of populations of some animal species and plants, and in some cases, to achieve increase in their number. Protected areas occupy 14.63% of Sushi and 2.98% of the marine territory. Representatives of the sort Homo for the first time appeared in the territory of Ukraine about 1 million years ago. In the territory of Ukraine about 30 remains of parking of people of times of an early Paleo, the oldest are found at Kidak, Gaspra, I understand, the Cape Myachny, near Sevastopol. In the Crimea, Kulyovo in the Transcarpathian region, Amvrosivka in Donetsk region, Lukavroblevskaya in the Khmelnytskaya region, Neporatovo in the Chernivtsi region. Neanderthal men came to the territory of modern Ukraine 150,000 years ago, and Cro-Magnonites, about 30,000 years ago. Parking the snowstorm Kiev 3, Kirillovskaya, Gunazai, Mazinsky and others belong to the top Paleo. The Eneolith period. Copper Age. And the Neolithic is presented Tripilian, Srednjostogovsky and some other cultures.
Approximately during the same period, Greeks began to found the first colonies in northern Black Sea coast within the All-Greek colonization movement of the 8th-6th centuries BB.
Great Greek colonization. Vermena. A framework of ancient Greek colonization of northern Black Sea coast, the middle the 7th-5th century BB. She passed in several stages and in several directions. Western. Lower Pabuzi and Lower Dnieper Bank, western and southwest Crimea. And east. Both coast of the Kerch Strait, coast of the Caucasus and Pruzovie. During colonization, several tens of policies and settlements, among which Bospor Kimiristi, Ovaya, Chersonese Torian, Phanagoria, the Shooting Gallery, Nimiye, Germanassa were the largest, were based. It is considered that Scythians created the first state in the territory of modern Ukraine. About 200 BB Scythians were forced out by Sarmatians.
In the 3rd century AD from the northwest on the territory of Ukraine moved Golta, which created the kingdom of Oyam, here the second state higher education in the territory of Ukraine.
Closely connect also Turnipolsk archaeological culture on the right bank with the Gothic era and in Black Sea coast, which existed at a boundary of 2-3, a turn of the 4-5 centuries. In 375 Gotha got beaten by the Huns, who came from depths of Asia and moved for Danube, in borders of the Roman Empire, where over time created the kingdoms. The power of Huns later gradually broke up century to a number of the Turkic states.
After invasion of Huns hegemony over the present territory of Ukraine at the end of the 5th century passed two Slavic tribes of the Ant and Sklavin, presented according to Pinkovsky.
Also partially Kolochinsky. And Prague by archaeological cultures. Soon the left bank part of the territory of Ukraine with Tavria became dependent on Khazar Khanate. Saltovo-Maetsky archaeological culture. The northwest areas of Ukraine are considered as the most probable place of origin of Slavs now. Drevlians, Northerners, the Buzina, Tivrits treated Slavic tribes in the territory of Ukraine at the end of the first millennium to Aglade, Kach, the Volinina and others. By 882 in Kiev, according to the chronicle, Princes Askoldandir ruled. The Prince Novgorod Oleg in 882 captured Kiev, having killed his princes, and transferred from Novgorod the capital there. Kiev became the capital of the old Russian state, which included in the structure lands along a tradeway, from the Varangian in Greeks, on the north to Ladoga, and lands of the basin of Upper Volga on the east to Murom. The new created state entered rivalry with Khazar Khanate and Byzantium. Wars began in 860. At Olga the tribute sizes were regulated.
Siepoludia.
At Svetoslav the power of the Kiev princes extended to all East Slavic tribes and Khazaria was crushed. At Vladimir the Orthodox Christianity from Byzantium is the state religion. 988. Was accepted and defensive works on the southern border for fight against Pechenegs were constructed.
Territories and the several territories repeated and flowed to various areas of the East European plain of numerous groups of Slavic immigrants which are already developed by Slavs from Moravian Podunavia who played an essential role consolidations of the Slavic population of Eastern Europe and came to the end with formation of Old Russian nationality continued.
At Yaroslav the Wise and Kiev temples were built, the library opened, the code of laws, the Russian truth was issued. Losing the hereditary rights. See the Lestvichny right. Representatives of the branch dynasty of Rurik dynasty fought for the power in certain parts of the state, often entering into alliances with the Cumans who occupied the South Russian steppes in the 11th century. The rights of local dynasties were recognized at the Lubitsky Congress. 1097. There is a gradual disintegration of Kievan Rus to formation of a number of principalities. In the territory of modern Ukraine there are Kiev, Volinsk, Chernihiv. Southwest areas of the principality. Pryaskoy and also Galitzy. Since 1140.
The united in 1199 with Volinsk in the uniform Galitsko-Volinsky Principality which existed till 1392.
Specific place was held by the Kiev Principality that was caused by position of Kiev as oldest, reigning for all Russian lands and principalities.
Escaping from the Polovtsian attacks and princely civil strifes which became frequent after Vladimir Monomach's death, a part of the population throughout the 12th century migrated to quieter growth and Suzdal lands where under the auspices of Yuri Dolgoruki the numerous new cities were based and grew. In 1169 the coalition of the Smolensk, Chernihiv and Suzdal princes which is brought together by the Vladimir Prince Andrei Bogolyubsky for the first time in the history of civil strife subjected Kiev to defeat.
New defeat of the city took place in 1203. After invasion of Batia 1237, 1240 and disorder of Kiev, 1240. The city came to desolation. In the second half of the 13th century Kiev was operated by the Vladimir deputies, and later the Horde Baskoka and local provincial princes, names of the majority of whom are unknown. Vandry Kiev, Pereyaslawsky and Chernigovo-Seversky lands after invasion lost the rate of evolution in comparison with neighbors. The princely elite terrorized by Mongols degraded, there was a decline of city life, continuous territorial crushing was intensified.
Contrary to it, the Galitsko-Volinsk princely branch which dropped the winner out of the War of 1205-1245 managed to lay the foundation of own powerful state which existed on the historical arena of Russia even the whole century. In 1299 Kiev lost the last capital attribute, the residence of the Metropolitan, though the Metropolitan continued to be called as Kiev. At the same time for management of a southwest part of a Metropolitanate of Russia the Constantinople Patriarch Afanassy in 1303 built the Galitsky Bishop Nifont in a Metropolitanate, and formed the Galitsky Metropolitanate.
In 1321 the Lithuanian Prince Gediminas in fight on the river Irpin broke the giant army of the South Russian princes then conquered Kiev, Pereyaslavl, Belgorod and other cities weakened by the Mongolian invasion which were forced to recognize his supreme power. The Kiev Prince Stanislav, the descendant Olgovichi, recognized themselves as the vassal of the Lithuanian Prince Gediminas, at the same time remaining also depending on the Horde. Nevertheless, the Baskachestvo remains before fight on Blue Waters. 1362. And payment of a tribute to the Golden Horde meets also after her. In 1325 in the west under threat of war by local boyars Vladimir Lvovich, the last legitimate heir from a dynasty of Rurik dynasty was stripped of power.
The Galitsky inheritance passed at their choice to Boleslav Troydanovich, for whom to a princely throne there ascended a Lyubert Gediminovich baptized under the name of the Tre.
Really Lyubert's power was limited to Volhynia as in 1344-1345, after a campaign of the Polish king Casimir III, Galicia gradually passed under the power of Poland. The Polish kingdom finally occupied Galitsky and Holmsky lands in 1387. In the 13th-14th centuries of the earth of modern Ukraine were divided between neighboring states. So, Bukovina since 1359 departed to the Moldavian Principality under the name of the Shapinsky Earth, and Transcarpathia in the second half of the 13th century, in structure of the Hungarian kingdom. In 1362 the Grand Duke Lithuanian Olgierd broke Tatars in fight at Blue Waters. They left inflow of the southern Bug, and borrowed Podolia and Kiev. In 1368-1372 Olgierd, in the union with Tver, made 3 campaigns to Moscow, but strength of rivals were approximately equal and business ended with the contract which divided spheres of influence. Some of children of the pagan Olgierd accepted orthodoxy. The Tridonsko offered yet not defined Yagelo the dynastic union, a marriage on his daughter, but he wasn't fated to take place. In the conditions of fight against Crusaders, the Moscow Principality, and because of the internal conflicts, Grand Duchy of Lithuania entered into alliance with the Polish Kingdom, signed Krevsky Union. 1385.
In 1386 the Grand Duke Lithuanian Yagelo married the Polish Princess Jadwiga, was christened on a Catholic ceremony, and Vladislav became the Polish king under a Christian name.
In 1387 Lithuania adopted Catholicism. Yagelo. Jagiellon. Descendants Protestant in both powers 3 centuries, from 14th to the 16th century.
The Lithuanian state was called Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Russian and Zemetiski that reflected the polyethnic structure of his population.
An important role in a certain interval of time was played by Old Russian culture and customs.
In the 14th-15th centuries Kiev, Vladimir Volinsk and other cities acquired the Magdeburg right.
City self-government. However, in the second half of the 15th century Grand Duchy of Lithuania turned from a peculiar federation of the Russian and, actually, Lithuanian principalities into the centralized state in which the increasing role was played by Jagiellonov, accepted by the dominating dynasty Catholicism. Rivalry with Moscow for heritage of Kievan Rus and oppression of Orthodox Christians was led to transition of many West Russian princes to service to the Grand Duke Moscow, to serious military defeats, Varushki fight, and reduction of the territory of the state.
About 1434 the Russian voivodeship with the administrative center in Lviv was formed of lands of the Galitsko-Volhynsky Principality.
The Russian Kingdom.
The weakness of Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the Livonian War led in 1569 to the Lublin Union, reunification of Lithuania to one state with Poland, and to formation of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth with the uniform Senate and Diet.
Monetary and tax systems were also integrated.
Volhynia, Podlasie, Podolia, Bratslashchina and Kayashchina passed under the power of Poland.
As a result of the Russian-Polish War, Dulinsky Truce, under the terms of which the Smolensk, Chernihiv and Seversk regions also were a part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, was signed.
After the Lublin Union, the Kronschli Otta actively made habitable the rich and low-populated lands of Ukraine.
Appeared a latifundium Zamoyski, Zilkevsky, Kalinovsky, Konetsbolsky, Pototsky, Vishnevetsky, Brunitsky, Danilovichi. From the moment of falling of Constantinople, the authorities looked for ways of reunion of Christians of the Western and East ceremonies. In 1458 the Kiev Metropolitanate. But in 1470 the dignity of the Kiev Metropolitan was recognized by the Constantinople Patriarch. Was based, and in 1596 the Brest Union of Orthodox Church of the Kiev Metropolitanate with Catholic Church took place. Recognition by Orthodox Christians of Catholic doctrines and the supreme power of the Pope, at preservation by Orthodox Church of ceremonies and church services in Slavic languages became a basis of the Union. Oppressions of Orthodox Christians which led to transition to an uniatstvo of a considerable part of the Ukrainian nobility were connected with the Union. The Union didn't resolve religious contradictions. Collisions between Orthodox Christians and Uniats became more and more fierce. The authorities closed Orthodox churches and expelled the priests refusing to join the Union from arrivals. The earth of the south of present Ukraine in the second half of the 15th century represented the steppe not populated with settled population, which was called as the wild field. The Dnieper thresholds, the natural exits of radical rocks crossing the Dnieper current between the modern cities of Dnieper and Zaporizhia, were peculiar gate in the field from more populated central Dnieper bank. Below thresholds, Dnieper was divided into sleeves, creating the numerous islands, lakes, gulfs and passages rich with a game and fish, and where it was convenient to hide and defend. At this time, groups of fugitives from the territory of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which arrived here for various reasons, began to be formed. These people called themselves Cossacks and were engaged generally in hunting, fishery, agriculture, trade and military business. The ethnic structure of these groups wasn't uniform. At the end of the 16th and first to a half of the 17th century, the number of the Cossack revolts became frequent. All of them, however, were suppressed by means of Polish and the Ukrainian magnates. In 1648 the Zaporizhia Cossacks under the leadership of the hetman Bogdan Khmelnytsky excited a big rebellion in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which result was a creation in the Dnieper Bank of autonomous political unit, Hetmanate. Because of difficulties of warfare and unreliability of the ally Crimean Khan, Bogdan Khmelnytsky on Pereyaslawski Rada became a citizen of the Russian kingdom. Then the Russian-Polish War 1654-1667 began. During the war in Hetmanate civil war, Ravina began, and there was a political situation at which left bank Ukraine wished to be as a part of Russia, and then right bank Cossack the foreman gravitated to the agreement with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that was followed also by election of different hetmen. This split was recorded in Andrasovsky Truce between Russia and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. During the Russian-Turkish War 1676-1681, Russian Cossack army by joint forces reflect expansion of the Ottoman Empire to left bank Ukraine. As a part of Russia in Ukraine there is an economic recovery, the population increases, Orthodox churches freely are under construction. During Great Northern War the hetman Ivan Mazepa comes over to the side of the Swedish King Karl XII, with whom he suffers a defeat in the Poltava fight. Reduction of the autonomy of hetmanate and its management through Little Russian board as a consequence of this event. Throughout the 18th century, integration of the Cossack nobility into the Russian nobility is observed. Natives of Ukraine hold high positions as a part of the Russian Empire. Among them there are such influential politicians as the head of the Synod Feofan Prokopovich, General Field Marshals Alexei and Kirill Razumovsky, the Chancellor Alexander Bezbruk.
For unification of the state, the Empress Catherine II abolishes hetmanate in 1764 and Zaporizhia Sech in 1775.
The Cossack nobility is equated to the Russian nobility. The extensive lands, Kuban, Stavropol territory, Novorossiya, attached to Russia are allocated to Cossacks for settling. As a result of the Russian-Turkish War of 1768-1774, the Crimean Khanate was recognized as independent of any foreign power, and in 1783 his lands were included in structure of Russia. At the partitions of Poland in 1772-1795, Galakina takes over in structure of the Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria of the Empire Austrian Habsburg, and the rest of Right Bank Ukraine, including Podolia, Volhynia, in possession of the Russian Empire. On the steppe lands attached to Russia of Zaporizhia, northern Black Sea coast and Taurida, the cities, including such nowadays large as Zaporizhia. 1770. Kryvyi Rih. 1775. Dnieper. In 1776 it is based as Ekaterinoslav. Kherson, Mariupol. 1778. Sevastopol. 1783. Simferopol, Melitopol. 1784. Nikolaev. 1789. Odessa. 1794. Luhansk. In 1795 it is based as the Luhansk plant, or based on the place of the Cossack and Tatar settlements. Until the end of the beginning of the 19th century, Ukraine was mainly agrarian age, and from the middle the 19% east regions of Ukraine, and then in Kyiv begin to develop as industrial. In establishing production in the south of Ukraine of the commodity grain in large quantities exported through the Black Sea ports, the big role was played not only by the Ukrainian peasants, but also the German colonists whose number in Ukraine made about 500,000. By the beginning of the 20th century, the region of the Carpathians, the second in the world on value after Baku, the area of oil production.
From 1917-1921 in Ukraine there was a chain of the political and military conflicts between various political, ethnic and social groups. In the spring of 1917 the Ukrainian parties in Kiev created representative body, Central Izblad, which undertook functions of the state parliament.
Central Izblad in Kiev from June 1917 to January 1918 I published 4 station wagons, the first 3 of which proclaimed the federal nature and the autonomy of Ukraine, and the 4th on January 22, 1918. Declared independence of the Ukrainian People's Republic. In parallel with these, in the territory of Ukraine from the middle of 1917 the system of councils began to be formed, by the end of the year in which the main power was received by Bolsheviks.
After unsuccessful attempt in Kiev, on December 24-25, 1917, in Kharkov under the leadership of Bolsheviks, the first all-Ukrainian Congress of Councils which proclaimed creation of the Ukrainian People's Republic of Councils, which is in a federal relationship with the Soviet Russia, took place.
Existence in Ukraine at the same time of two authorities provoked armed conflict between Bolsheviks and the Central Glad.
On January 29, 1918, on approaches to Kiev there was a fight near Krutomy, then Bolsheviks occupied the capital of An.
After signing of the Brest Peace Treaties of February 3 and on March 8, the territory of An passed under control of the German and Austro-Hungarian armies. Because of inability of the Ukrainian government to achieve stabilization of an internal political situation in Ukraine and to guarantee performance of the Brest World Central and was Glad is dismissed, and the Ukrainian power under the leadership of the Hetman Pavel Skoropadsky was proclaimed.
After disintegration of Austria-Hungary in the territory of East Galician, the West Ukrainian People's Republic
WUPR
was formed, and at the same time the Polish-Ukrainian War, which led to defeat of Zun and transition of her territory under the Polish and Romanian control,
Pocăti broke out. At the end of 1918, after leaving of the German troops from occupied territories, the army of the Directory of An occupied Kiev, having overthrown the Hetman government. On January 22, 1919, between An and Zunzluki's Act was proclaimed. At the beginning of 1919, on the territory of Ukraine, Bolsheviks entered, having occupied her most part by spring. On March 10, 1919, at the Three All-Ukrainian Congress of Councils in Kharkiv, Bolsheviks proclaimed the independent state the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Then the first constitution of USSR was adopted.
In the spring-summer of 1919, on the territory of Ukraine, troops of armed forces of the south of Russia entered, and on August 31, along with the Ukrainian troops, seized Kiev.
By November 1919, forces of the White Movement occupied the most part of the territory of Ukraine. Since fall of 1919, fundamental change in favor of the Red Army was outlined in the civil war in the Central Russia, and in Ukraine in backs white insurgent troops of Nestor Makhno. Therefore the Soviet formations inflicted defeat over White armies, developed vigorous activity, and at the end of 1919 entered on the territory of Ukraine.
Since the end of 1919 until the end of 1920, of Army of Raqqa occupied all main territory of Ukraine.
In April 1920, the conflict in the main territory of Ukraine was entered by the Polish troops, and from 1920-1921 Central and Right Bank Ukraine were the arena of the Soviet-Polish War, in which An acted as the ally of Poland.
The chain of the conflicts came to the end in 1920-1921 with the establishment of the Soviet power and the statement of USSR.
The Shi territory of modern Ukraine.
Except the western Ukraine, which parts were a part of the Polish and Czechoslovak republics and also kingdoms Romania.
December 30, 1922, the Russian seas, the Ukrainian Tsar, the Belarusian Tsar and the Transcaucasian seas signed the contract on formation of the USSR, which laid the foundation for establishment of the USSR.
In 1920, the 1930th years in Ukraine, the Soviet authorities pursued policy of an Ukrainization and indigenization of the party device was carried up. By expansion of scope of Ukrainian in education, science, Massachusetts media, armies and parties, Bolsheviks tried to lower degree of hostility of Ukrainians to the Soviet power.
However, since 1930, at the initiative of the chairman of the Ukrainian Communists Lazar Kaganovich, the campaign of sharp criticism of an Ukrainization and its supporters started. In the late 20s and the early 30s in Ukraine, as well as in general across the USSR, the policy of collectivization was carried out. Her mistakes in combination with crop failures and a drought led to the hunger, which is officially called in modern Ukraine Holodomor. Captured many regions of the USSR including the Ukrainian Sur in 1932, 1933 and entailed the considerable human victims. By different calculations, as a result of hunger the population of USSR lost from 4 to 12 million people. He destroyed villages in the Dnieperbank, Slobodshina, Zaporizhia and Kuban. Massachusetts hunger in USSR of 1932-1933 is called in modern Ukraine genocide and crime against humanity. In the 1930th years industrialization, including USSR was carried up. In 1934 the capital of USSR was transferred from Kharkiv to Kiev. 1920, the 1930th years in the West Ukrainian lands became time of formation of the anti-Polish liberation movement which was issued in the form of the Organization of the Ukrainian Nationalists. Later. In September 1939, after attack of Germany on Poland, the Western Ukraine according to arrangements of the USSR with Germany was occupied with the Red Army and annexed to USSR. In 1940 by agreement with Romania, a part of Bessarabia, northern Bukovina and area of Hertz was attached to USSR. On December 18, 1940 Germany approved the Plan Barbarossa and on June 22, 1941 attacked the USSR. The Great Patriotic War which proceeded 4 years began. On September 19, 1941 troops of Germany and its allies were taken by Kiev and the right bank, on October 24, Kharkiv and the left bank, and in July 1942 the Crimea and Kuban. In August 1943 the USSR intercepted an offensive initiative after the victory on the Kursk Arch. On November 6, 1943 the Soviet troops freed Kiev, and in May 1944 the right bank and the Crimea. At the end of August 1944 the USSR freed the western Ukraine and began offensive at the countries of Europe occupied by Germany. War and the German occupation was followed by cruelty, large-scale destructions of settlements, extermination of the Jewish population, violent evacuation of the population. From 8 to 10 million inhabitants of Ukraine became the victims of this war. A part of the Ukrainian nationalists was at war and mined the Red Army and against Germany as a part of UPA. In 1945 the Transcarpathian region was attached to USSR following the results of World War II according to the contract of the USSR with Czechoslovakia. The Ukrainian Sur within the USSR became one of founder members of the Union. The first computer of the Soviet MESM was constructed at the Kiev Institute of Electrical Equipment and began to function in 1950. Also was strongly destroyed during war, more than 700 cities and 28,000 villages, therefore restoration demanded considerable efforts or destroyed. The situation was complicated by post-war hunger of 1946-1947 which was caused by a drought and military destructions of infrastructure. It claimed tens of thousands of the lives. But by 1950 the Republic completely surpassed the pre-war level of the industry and production. After Stalin's death in 1953 NS. Khrushchev became the first secretary of the Central Committee of the CSU. being the first secretary of the Communist Party of the Ukrainian SR in 1938-1949, Khrushchev was deeply familiar with the republic, and after arrival to the all-union power, he began to emphasize friendship between the Ukrainian and Russian people. In February 1954, the decree of Presidium of the Supreme Council of the USSR from structure of Rusfos to structure of USSR transferred the Crimean region.
On April 26, 1986, in Kiev region of the Ukrainian SR, there was an accident on the Chernobyl NPP which became global technogenic catastrophe and caused radioactive infection of extensive territories. On March 17, 1991, the all-Union referendum on preservation of the USSR, on which also the Republican question that Ukraine has to be as a part of the Union of the Soviet sovereign states on the basis of the Declaration on the State Sovereignty of Ukraine.
80.2% was supported as the all-Union question, about need of preservation of the USSR as the updated Federation of the Equal Sovereign Republics. 70.2% took place. After defeat of the August Putsch of Gichichich in Moscow, on August 24, 1991, the Supreme Council of the Ukrainian SR declared independence of Ukraine.
On December 1, 1991, the all-Ukrainian referendum which bulletin included the question, whether you confirm the act of declaration of independence of Ukraine,
took place. The appearance on a referendum on the Republic made 84.18%. 31,891,742 people. From which 32% answered, yes, I confirm, and there are no 7.58%, don't confirm. On December 8, 1991, heads of three founder republics of the USSR 50, M. Kravchuk, Ukraine, B. N. Yeltsin, Russia, and S. Shushkevich, Belarus, signed the Bulavesha Accords about the termination of existence of the USSR and creation of the Commonwealth of Independent States. At the time of the collapse of the USSR, Ukraine was one of the most developed federal republics, in respect of education, network of the scientific and industrial enterprises. In Ukraine there was one of agriculture and also very powerful military-industrial complex, including the enterprises for release of missile armament, the heavy load transport planes, tanks conducting in the USSR, which are most developed in the USSR. Ukraine had enough scientific, engineering and administrative shops. In particular, by the beginning of 1992, in the territory of Ukraine, 1240 nuclear warheads, 133 strategic Rs-18 rockets, 46 strategic Rs-22 rockets, 564 cruise missiles for bombers and about 300 units of tactical nuclear weapon were located. After the decision not to keep uniform armed forces in the CISIS, they were dismantled, partially with financial support of Shah, and taken out to Russia. Decline in production in Ukraine in the 1990s was much bigger than in Russia, Belarus, the Baltic republics. All this did start of the Ukrainian statehood difficult and recovery from the crisis, which happened in USSR, as well as in all USSR in the late 80s and in the 1990s. Long.
In 1996, the Constitution of Ukraine was adopted that promoted stabilization of political system and at the same time the majority of powers of authority in hands of the then President 50.
D. Kuchma concentrated. In September of the same year, the monetary reform was undertaken and the new currency, hryvnia, is entered. In 2004, results of the second round of presidential elections weren't recognized as opposition, having accused the winner 5F.
Due to the Massachusetts system falsifications that led to the beginning of the Massachusetts protests, which received the name Orange Revolution, under pressure of which the Supreme Court of Ukraine cancelled the decision of the Sejets on Yanukovych's victory and appointed revoting of the second round of presidential elections, the results of which Feb.
Yushchenko was elected the president.
Yanukovych returned to the power in 2006 when he became prime minister during the anti-recessionary coalition that led to early parliamentary elections in September 2007. In 2010, Yanukovych was elected the president and created the new government led by N. Yao
Azarov. On April 21, Viktor Yanukovych signed the agreement with the President of Russia D.A.
Medvedev on extension of term of stay of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation in Sevastopol till 2042.
On October 11, 2011, Pekos Court of Kiev sentenced the former Prime Minister of Ukraine and the main rival of Yanukovych at presidential elections, PAI-5. Tymoshenko to 7 years of imprisonment. On July 30, 2012, Ukraine became the DIC of the Free Trade Zone of the CIS. The discontent with Yanukovych's government developed during 2010-2013 into numerous protest actions, including the Tax Maidan, Ukraine reminding Yanukovych, protests in Vrdica. Main articles: A political crisis in Ukraine, 2013-2014. Change of the power in Ukraine in February 2014, protests in the southeast of Ukraine, 2014. Annexation of the Crimea to the Russian Federation, armed conflict in the east of Ukraine and the Second Minsk Agreement. The Euromaidan events, which began in November 2013 in connection with the decision of the government of Ukraine to suspend process of preparation for signing of the agreement on association with the European Union, caused an acute political crisis, and in February 2014 led to change of the government. On February 22, the President 5.
Yanukovych was announced by the Verkhovna Rada withdrawn from execution of the constitutional powers, and next day fulfillment of duties of the President of Ukraine was assigned to the Chairman of the Parliament A.
Turchinov. On February 24, the detached President 5. Yanukovych, being afraid for the life, I left Ukraine to Russia.
On February 27, in the Verkhovna Rada, the European Choice Coalition, which created the government which was headed by P.
Yatsenyuk, was formed. The new leadership of Ukraine declared renewal of a course towards European integration. On March 21, representatives of the European Union and A.P. Yatsenyuk signed political bloc of the Agreement on Association. On June 27, an economic part of agreement was signed. As opposed to the countries of the West, with enthusiasm apprehended political changes in Ukraine, the Russian government refused to recognize legitimacy of the new Ukrainian authorities, insisting that the lawful president of Ukraine is 5.
Yanukovych, who, according to Russia, was displaced by opposition as a result of a coup.
In the morning on February 23, the Russian government made the decision to begin work on return of the Crimea to structure of Russia, but under a condition: if it is wanted by people who live in the Crimea. And during the followed events of February-March 2014, Russia gave support to the pro-Russian forces on the peninsula, including the armed forces, having carried out annexation of the Crimea. It didn't gain the international recognition, and the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine announced on April 15, 2014 the Crimea temporarily occupied territory. At the end of February, the beginning of March, of the city of the southeast of Ukraine captured Massachusetts social and political protest actions against the new Ukrainian authorities, in protection of the status of Russian, under the federalistic, separatist and pro-Russian slogans. In April 2014 it was declared creation of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic.
On April 15, the Ukrainian leaders began the military operation of demanding armed groups of supporters of the DDNN.
On May 11, the authorities of the self-proclaimed republics held the referenda on independence, which didn't gain the international recognition. On May 25 in Ukraine, early presidential elections took place. The president already in the first round elected the candidate from the party, Solidarity, PA. Poroshenko, one of leaders of the Maidan. Since April 2014 in east areas of Ukraine, heavy fighting between the Ukrainian Army, National Guard of Ukraine and paramilitary groups of pro-Ukrainian volunteers, on the one hand, and paramilitary groups of the DD and LPR, with another is going. On September 5, 2014 in Minsk, after negotiations, the ceasefire agreement was reached, however mutual firings continued. On September 16, 2014 the Verkhovna Rada and the European Parliament at the same time, using video conference, ratified the Agreement on Association of Ukraine and EC. Large-scale fighting was resumed near Debaltseve and at the Donetsk airport in January 2015. On February 12 the second Minsk agreement about ceasefire was signed, but fighting continued as leaders of insurgents said that Debaltseve is the internal region of the DD and therefore the agreement doesn't extend to him.
On February 18, Debaltseve and its vicinities passed under control and recognized with the international community of the republics. In 2017, the rating of the President Poroshenko sharply fell, despite receiving by Ukraine a visa-free regime with the EU.
Quickly, the Democratic Coalition, in which there were only Popular Front and Petro Poroshenko bloc, broke up. On April 19, 2016, cabinet of Yatsenyuk was dismissed and the new government led by 5B. Grossman is appointed. On January 6, 2019, with active participation of the President Poroshenko, to Ukraine it was handed about autocephaly of Orthodox Church. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine was created. However, her creation entailed sharp discussions in church society. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church didn't support creation of PU and declared it group of dissenters. On March 31, 2019, the first round of election of the President of Ukraine, in which 5A. Zelensky, the famous showman and the director of comic studio, Kvartal-95, collected 30.24% of votes took place. The acting president P.A. Poroshenko, who gained 15.95%, became his closest persecutor. On April 21 the second round took place. By results of processing of 100% of bulletins, the majority of votes, 73.23%, was gathered by Zelensky. The current President Poroshenko recognized defeat. On May 20 there took place 5a. Zelensky's inauguration.
On July 21 early parliamentary elections in which the pro-presidential party, Servant of the People, gained 43.16% took place that allowed it for the first time in the history of Ukraine to create the monomajority.
Following the results of a national census as of December 5, 2001, the population of Ukraine made 48,240,902 permanent residents of and 48,457,102 people of actual population, and according to the estimated data output at the rate on the existing growth rates of the population, by July 2012 its number decreased up to 44,596,155 people.
By January 1, 2017 up to 42,414,900 permanent residents and 42,584,500 people of actual population. As of January 1, 2018 according to GOSTAT of Ukraine, the population decreased up to 42,216,766 permanent residents and 42,386,403 people of actual population.
These data without the Crimea and Sevastopol. With them, as of May 1, 2014, about 1,000 people of actual population and 45,182,900 permanent residents. Ukraine thus take the 37th place in the world by the number of inhabitants. Kiev, the capital and the largest city of Ukraine with the population more than 2.8 million people.
Average population density makes about 77.3 people/km.
At the same time the population is distributed unevenly. Industrial East areas: Donetsk, Luhansk, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, and the Carpathian regions are most densely populated. Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Chernivtsi.
In particular, population density of Donetsk region makes 172.9 people/km.
Lviv -117.8, and Dnipropetrovsk -107.3. Certain regions of the Ukrainian Carpathians, Polisia and the southern areas are rather seldom populated.
In the Volynsk region -51.4 people/km.
Zhytomyr -44.1, Kherson -39. The share of urban population makes 69.2%. As of January 1, 2017, 3 cities had actual population more than 1 million people. Kiev, the capital of the country, -2,925,760 persons. Kharkiv -1,439,036 people. Odessa -1,010,783 people.
At the turn of the 19th-20th centuries in the territory of modern Ukraine, natural increase above an average across the Russian Empire.
14. Was observed. The greatest values were noted in Ekaterinoslавsky, Taurian, Volynsk provinces and in the field of army of Donskoy. The subsequent wars: World War I, Civil War, the Great Patriotic War during which Ukraine became the combat zone, and hunger of the 1920th, 1930th,
The end of the 1940th years negatively influenced a demographic situation. As a result of these events, millions of people died. In addition, the delay of rates of increase in population characteristic of industrially developed countries affected. So if from 1897 to 1913, 16 years, the population of Ukraine increased by 24%. Watch table. Then from 1959 to 1976, 17 years, for only 17%, and from 1976 to 1992, 16 years, for 6%.
The maximum of population of Ukraine was noted in 1993 when she reached 52.2 million.
Since this year, continuous decrease in population with emigration growth abroad, falling of birth rate and increase in mortality is registered.
A reduction of population is noted in all regions of Ukraine including in Kiev.
As of 2020, the smallest decline in population was noted in the Chernivtsi, Rivne and Volynsk regions. In 2011 to 11,000 settlements of Ukraine it isn't recorded any birth. In the same 2011 the birth rate exceeded mortality only in 5 of 25 regions of Ukraine: Kiev, the Transcarpathian, Volynsk, Chernivtsi and Rivne regions.
In 2012 Ukraine took the 19th place among the countries of the world on mortality indicators on 1,000 people of the population.
In 2013 Ukraine was in the 23rd place in the world on death rate on 1,000 people of the population. The national structure of the population of Ukraine according to population censuses. Before the actual loss of the Crimea. According to the last all-Ukrainian population census conducted in 2001, Ukrainians make 77.8% of the population and are the majority in all regions, except the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and Sevastopol. The Russian -17.3% make a considerable part of the population in east and southern areas, especially in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and also in the large cities. Also Belarusians -0.6%, Moldavians -0.5%, the Crimean Tatars -0.5%, Bulgarians -0.4%, Hungarians -0.3%, Romanians -0.3%, Poles -0.3%, Jews -0.2%, Armenians -0.2%, Greeks -0.2%, Tatars -0.2%, others -1.2% live.
In Ukraine nearly 20 years the population census, therefore it is difficult to estimate the modern ethnic structure of the population wasn't made. Nevertheless, the research of statistics of bodies, in that part where the nationality is specified in acts of civil status, allows to tell the registry office about existence of a trend of identification of ethnic origin and nationality.
So embodies the registry office in 1993 in Kharkiv 43.6% Russian specified ethnic origin, and in 2014 such there were only 7.3%.
At the same time, the share of those someone specified nationality Ukrainians increased from 49.9% up to 90.1%.
According to Article 10 of the Constitution of Ukraine, the only state language is Ukrainian. The state provides all-round development and functioning of Ukrainian in all spheres of public life in all territory of Ukraine. At the same time, free development, use and protection of Russian and other languages of ethnic minorities of Ukraine is guaranteed.
According to the researches conducted by Razumkov's Center in 2011, Ukrainian to the family 61% of citizens of Ukraine.
In 2016, 69%. Considered Russian -36%. In 2016, 27%. Other languages -2%. The used language of the population of Ukraine.
According to a research of language behavior of the population of Ukraine CAMUS 2003.
In Ukraine, besides Ukrainian, also Russian is widespread. Till August 10, 2012, the law of Ukraine about languages in the Ukrainian SER, according to which Russian was one of languages of international communication. Article. Which knowledge was required from officials along with knowledge of Ukrainian. Article. Worked. According to data of survey conducted in 2004 by the Kiev International Institute of Sociology. Keys. In Russian it is simpler to communicate houses for 45% of the population of Ukraine, whereas in Ukrainian -42%, or equally easy to communicate in both languages -13%. According to this poll of CAMUS, first of all used for communication Russian, vast majority of the population of the southern and east regions. According to survey conducted by the Research and Branding Group Company, 68% of citizens of Ukraine are fluent in Russian. Ukrainian -57%. According to researchers of the American Institute, Gallup, which is carried out in 2008, 83% of the interviewed citizens chose for communication with the interviewer Russian. According to an all-Ukrainian population census of 2001, 2% of all population of Ukraine called native language of the nationality. In 1979, 88.5%. Most of the population of the state, 32.6 million people, according to a census, called the native language Ukrainian.
The number of the Ukrainians who called the native language of the nationality exceeds 85.2%.
In 1979, 93.5%. Wide circulation in other languages, mainly neighboring states and the people, is historically caused. The most widespread of them is Russian, which, according to a census of 2001, was called by native 29.6% of residents of Ukraine. In 1979, 31.3%. However, according to researchers of language behavior of the population of Ukraine, CAMUS is used more than a half of the population of Ukraine, 52.8%. Ukrainian is more widespread in the central part, in the north and in the west of the country, Russian in the south and the east.
In the large cities of the east and south of Ukraine and also in Kiev, the prevalence of Russian in daily communication, despite a considerable share of the population which specified Ukrainian as the native language, is noticeable.
Ukraine, the secular state, Article 35 of the Constitution guarantees freedom of worship. According to the research conducted at the beginning of 2015, most of the interviewed residents of Ukraine consider itself Christian believers. 74% of inhabitants, Orthodox Christians, 8% Greek Catholic, on 1% Roman Catholic and Protestants. Evangelical Christians. Just Christians have called about 9% of respondents. Don't carry themselves to one of religious religions of 6%, and another 1% of respondents were at a loss with the answer.
Since December 2018 in Ukraine, two large jurisdictions calling themselves the Ukrainian Orthodox Churches coexist.
Ukrainian Orthodox Church is a part of Russian Orthodox Church. Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Autocephalous since January 2019. Also, there are smaller structures. The total number of Catholics. All ceremonies. In Ukraine, according to Annuario Pontificio, for 2009, makes 4,801,879 people in 4293 communities.
The most influential Protestant churches are the All-Ukrainian Union of Churches of Evangelical Baptist Christians, the All-Ukrainian Union of Churches of Christians of Belief Evangelical, Pentecostal, and the Ukrainian Union Conference of Seventh-day Adventist Church.
As of the beginning of the 21st century, the share of Muslims, according to one of heads of the Muslim community, made from 1 to 4% of Ukrainians. Generally ethnic Crimean Tatars.
Muslims live in the Crimea, the most considerable communities in Simferopol, Bakasarai and the Old Crimea.
As of January 1, 2015 in the country. Without data on the Crimea. 87 religious centers and 292 religious managements were registered. Dioceses, diocese, etc.
Which represent more than 50 various confessional directions function, registered local religious communities, 516 monasteries, 365 religious missions, 78 brotherhoods, 198 spiritual educational institutions, 12406 Sunday schools.
The Constitution of Ukraine fixes the following division of Ukraine. 24 areas, 2 cities with the special status and the Autonomous Republic of Crimea Sea. In Ukraine there are 490 areas, 459 cities, 885 urban-type settlements and 28450 villages and other settlements.
The Autonomous Republic of Crimea, according to the Constitution of Ukraine, is her integral component and within the powers determined by the Constitution of Ukraine resolves the issues carried to her maintaining.
Until recently, areas were divided into the areas subordinated to regional centers, respectively, and in structure of the power councils and executive bodies. Administrations of regional, local, city levels were allocated. According to reform of 2015, administrative territorial division of Ukraine has to be changed, is decentralized.
With education instead of 11,000 local councils of 2,000 integrated territorial bulks.
Ukraine, the unitary republic of the mixed type. The fundamental law of the state is the constitution.
According to Economist Intelligence Unit, Ukraine in 2018 was classified under the Index of Democracy as the hybrid mode, having taken the 17th place from 29 countries of Eastern Europe.
The head of state is the president, who is also the supreme commander of the armed forces of Ukraine and the chairman of the Board of National Security and Defense of Ukraine.
The position of the president was founded on July 5, 1991. The first president of Ukraine from 1991 to 1994 was Leonid Kravchuk. Since May 20, 2019, the position of the president is held by Vladimir Zelensky.
The president is elected for a period of 5 years by a ballot on a general direct equal election. The same person can't hold the presidency more than 2 terms in a row.
Leonid Kravchuk became in public elected president, the first in the history of the country, having won presidential elections of 1991.
The supreme body of executive power of Ukraine, the cabinet, which head is the prime minister and which part the first deputy prime minister, deputy prime ministers and ministers are. Since March 4, 2020, the prime minister is Denis Shmyhal. The only regulatory authority in the country is the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. The operating convocation of the Verkhovna Rada, the 9th. It is permanent structure and 2 times a year are convoked at a session.
At the regular sessions, the Verkhovna Rada holds an inauguration of the elected president and approves the main directions of the state course offered by the president for 5-year term.
The president bears responsibility to the Verkhovna Rada. The parliament can announce to him an impeachment in the order established by the constitution. The constitutional structure of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine - 450 deputies. The competence of Parliament, according to Article 84 of the Constitution, includes development, acceptance and control of performance of laws, the approval of the state budget, ratification of the international agreements, purpose of an all-Ukrainian referendum and other powers. People's Deputies of Ukraine are elected for 5-year term during the direct general equal election held on the mixed system. Justice in Ukraine is executed only by vessels. Jurisdiction of vessels extends to all legal relationship which arise in the state. The system of courts of law in Ukraine is under construction on the principles of territoriality and specialization. In the judicial system of Ukraine, courts work also economic, district appeal, and administrative, district appeal. The highest judicial authority in the system of courts of law is the Supreme Court. Earlier, the Supreme Specialized Court on consideration of civil and criminal cases, the Supreme Administrative Court and the Supreme Economic Court liquidated during judicial reform worked. Now, as a part of the Supreme Court, the Big Chamber and also cassation administrative, civil, criminal and economic courts work. Since November 30, 2017, the post of the chairman of the Supreme Court is held by Valentina Danishevskaya.
The Constitutional Court of Ukraine is separate, independent of courts of law.
It can't be cassation, appeal as supervisory instance for courts of law. Since September 17, 2019, the chairman of the Constitutional Court of Ukraine is Alexander Tepitsky. The multi-party system is characteristic of modern Ukraine. Earlier till 1991, the Communist Party remained the main political force. The modern party system of Ukraine developed in the early 90s. Activity of political parties is regulated by the current legislation. In 2001, the law about political parties, according to which any 100 citizens of the country have the right for party creation, was adopted. The party is subject to registration in the Ministry of Justice.
All parties are obliged to recognize the principles of the Constitution of Ukraine as the basic law of Ukraine.
As of 2021, in Ukraine, 365 political parties are officially registered. In the parliamentary elections which took place on July 21, 2019, took part 22 of them. The threshold established by the law and 5% of voices was overcome by 5 parties. The legal system of Ukraine has the mixed character.
The most part of precepts of law is established on classical European samples and belongs to the Romano-German legal family. After the collapse of the USSR in the context of process of democratic transformations, there is a large-scale reforming of a legal system which main objective proclaims ensuring rule of law and independence of judicial authority.
Regulations on ensuring basic rights and freedoms of the person are initially put in the Ukrainian constitution.
Measures for improvement of its situation in the field of human rights became one of the main directions of the liberal reforms which are carried out in Ukraine since the beginning of the 1998 years.
Within these efforts, the relevant legislation was accepted, work of the National Commission on Human Rights is sped up, this direction in work of Ministry of Justice is strengthened. A number of investigations concerning the cases of human rights violation made earlier is conducted. According to Article 10 of the Constitution, Ukraine has 3 state symbols, a flag, the coat of arms and the anthem. On January 15, 1992, music of the national anthem of Ukraine was approved. On March 6, 2003, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine approved the words, the text of the first couplet and refrain of the anthem.
On January 28, 1992, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine decided to approve bi-national flag of Ukraine, the national flag representing the rectangular panel consisting of 2 horizontally located strips, equal on width. Top, blue color, lower, yellow color. A flag of Ukraine is the rectangular panel with a ratio of the parties 2:3 and consisting of 2 equal strips, blue and yellow.
On February 19, 1992, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine adopted the resolution about the state emblem of Ukraine, according to which I claimed as the small coat of arms, considering him as the main element of the big coat of arms. On June 28, 1996, Article 20 of the Constitution of Ukraine approved the small coat of arms of the state, in a board, azure with a gold border, gold. At the time of Kievan Rus was the state emblem and the patrimonial crest of princes of Rurik dynasty. The small coat of arms is the main part of not accepted big coat of arms, on which the blue board with a yellow trizeb is represented.
Holidays. On January 1, New Year. On January 7, Christmas according to the Julian calendar. On March 8, the International Women's Day. On May 1-2, the Labor Day. On May 8, Day of Remembrance and Reconciliations. On May 9, the Victory Day over Nazism in World War II. On June 28, the Constitution Day of Ukraine. On August 24, the Independence Day. On October 14, Day of Defenders and Defenders of Ukraine. On December 25, Christmas on a Gregorian calendar. The passing date, Easter. The passing date, the Trinity Sunday.
During 1918-1922, the Ukrainian People's Republic had diplomatic relations with Poland, Germany, Bulgaria, Turkey, Vatican, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, Persia, Romania, Lithuania, Latvia, Finland, Estonia, Georgia, Austria and Czechoslovakia. In 1945, USA became the member of the Union, and subsequently such organizations as UNESCO, the International Labour Organization and others. The missions of the Soviet Ukraine at the Union were founded in Vienna, Paris, Geneva, New York.
In 1948, Ukraine for the first time became the non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. Up to 1991, Poland, the DDR, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Canada, Germany, the USA had consulates in Kiev. Bulgaria, Cuba, India and Egypt consulates in Odessa.
After 1991, Ukraine established diplomatic relations with the majority of the countries of the world.
As the Russian Federation, in exchange for payments for debts of the USSR, took away to itself all his former embassies, Ukraine was left practically without buildings of embassies or consulates abroad, except for embassy in the USC. Together with the Russian Federation and Belarus, Ukraine became the founder of the Commonwealth of Independent States. CIS. Though further I separated from him.
On May 31, 1997, presidents of the Russian Federation and Ukraine signed the Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation and Partnership, which was ratified by the Verkhovna Rada and the State Duma. On May 14, 1999, at a meeting of presidents of the states of Central Europe in Lviv, Kuchma said that Ukraine will go on the European way and will establish close ties with the EU.
Having condemned bombings of Yugoslavia in spring 1999, the Ukrainian diplomacy offered the intermediary role in resolution of conflict in the Balkans. At the moment, Ukraine is a member of such organizations and their divisions as the Union since 1945, UNICE since 1947, EVS since 1947, MEIS since 1947, World Meteorological Organization since 1948, WHO since 1948, Recreation Center since 1949, UNESCO since 1954, the ILO since 1954, AMA since 1956, AIA since 1957, AMAVIABI since 1960, PEEPS since 1962, VWAS since 1970, MUMPS since 1979, OSCE since 1992, the EDBRD since 1992, the IMF since 1992, IBRD since 1992, VWAS since 1992, the UTO since 1992, OCHIS since 1992, CUMIT since 1992, the Interpol since 1992, ICA since 1992, FE since 1993, FTELSAT since 1993, MEC since 1993, ISO since 1993, MSAS since 1993, The Instant since 1994, PARM since 1994, EAR since 1994, Vaj. Since 1994. Hans. Since 1994. Kekra. Since 1994. Mo. Since 1994. The Council of Europe. Since 1995. C. Since 1996. Vuan. Since 1997. Seep. Since 1997. Yimto. Since 1997. Intersputnik. Since 1997. Sturt. Since 1997. Edgego. Since 1998. Amovef. Since 1998. Whip. Since 1998. Actsa. Since 1999. Biov. Since 1999. Exit. Since 2000. Kimgov. Since 2001. Megam. Since 2001. Makers. Since 2003. Kmakech. Since 2003. Fa. Since 2003. Mar. Since 2004. The Initiative of Baku. Since 2004. Eurocontrol. Since 2004. SDF. Since 2005. There. Since 2006. She-Folds. Since 2006. Eureka. Since 2006. Liudo. Since 2008. Mac. Since 2009. Eek. Since 2010. Bees. Since 2011. The ETA of the CISIS. Since 2012. And other organizations. Ukraine is the associated dick of mum. Since 1995. Gammon. Since 2002. And CERN. With 2013. As the status of the observer in such organizations and their divisions as Matso. Since 1998. Say bye. Since 1999. Eurosec. Since 2002. Francophony. With 2006. The African Union. With 2016.
In 2014, Ukraine signed the Agreement on Association with EC, including regulations on creation of the Profound and Comprehensive Free Trade Zone, and in 2013 the status of the observer in the created EAS was provided to her. Ukraine has the individual partner plan with NATO since 2002, since 2005 in his framework the Accelerated Dialogue, and despite the extra bloc status stated by Ukraine it, as of 2013 is conducted, is the only partner state of alliance which takes part in all his operations. At the same time behind it the possibility of the accession to alliance is kept.
Earlier Ukraine was the actual dick of the CISIS. From 1991 to 2014.
On August 24, 1991, the Supreme Council of Ukraine made the decision on capture under the jurisdiction of all of the military formations of armed forces of the USSR located in Ukraine and on creation of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine.
Since August 24, 1991, under jurisdiction of Ukraine, 14 motorized rifle, 4 tank, 3 artillery divisions and 8 artillery crews, 4 crews of special troops, 2 airborne brigades, 9 crews of air defense, 7 regiments of combat helicopters, 3 air armies,
about 1,100 warplanes, and separate army vote passed.
The strategic nuclear forces deployed in the territory of Ukraine had 176 intercontinental ballistic missiles and also about 2,600 units of tactical nuclear weapon. After the disintegration of the Soviet Union and declaration in 1991 of independence, Ukraine inherited one of the most powerful groups of troops in Europe equipped with nuclear weapon and rather modern samples of arms and military equipment.
The government of Ukraine started creation of armed forces.
Simultaneous formation of a legal basis of activity of armed forces, reorganization of their structures, creations of the corresponding control systems, providing and other elements necessary for their functioning were characteristic signs of the period. Besides, formation of the armed forces of Ukraine was followed by considerable reduction of military structures, number of staff, quantity of arms and military equipment. In a basis of process of creation, political solutions of a leadership of Ukraine of rather nuclear-free and extra-bloc statehood were put. At the same time also the restrictions connected with ratification of the Compact about ordinary armed forces in Europe, and implementation of the Tashkent Agreement of 1992, by which not only the maximum equal arms for each state of the former USSR, but also for the so-called flying carrier, were established or considered.
In Ukraine he included the Nikolaev, Kherson, Zaporizhia regions and the Autonomous Republic of Crimea.
In a short time the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine adopted a package of acts of rather military sphere. Concept of defense and construction of the armed forces of Ukraine, resolution about Council of Defense of Ukraine, laws of Ukraine about defense of Ukraine, about the armed forces of Ukraine, military doctrine of Ukraine and so forth. For the same years also realization of nuclear disarmament of Ukraine is necessary. It is one of the most considerable historical events of the end of the 20th century. The state, the second in the history of mankind, after the Republic of South Africa,
voluntarily refused possession of nuclear weapon. On December 5, 1994, leaders of Ukraine, the USA, Russia and Great Britain signed the Memorandum of Security Guarantees in connection with accession of Ukraine to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the interstate document guaranteeing observance of provisions of the Final Act of CG, the Charter of the Union and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty concerning Ukraine as the state party of the contract which doesn't have nuclear weapon.
For June 1, 1996, in the territory of Ukraine there is no nuclear warhead left or ammunition. The foundation of national armed forces of the independent state was so laid. For short term the Ministry of Defense, the General Staff, types of armed forces, control systems, preparation and comprehensive providing troops were created.
Since July 1992. After the approval by the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine of the resolution of July 3, 1992 No. 2530 AG about participation of battalions of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and peacekeeping forces of the United Nations and zones of the conflicts in the territory of former Yugoslavia. Armed Forces of Ukraine actively participate in peacekeeping operations of the Union and NATO. At the end of July 1992, the Ukrainian peacekeeping contingent for the first time was involved in fighting as a part of UNPROFOR forces during the war in Bosnia.
Since 1992, about 37,000 servicemen of the Armed Forces of Ukraine took part in the international peacekeeping operations, including in such countries as Angola, Serbia, Kosovo, Northern Macedonia, Guatemala, Georgia, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, Moldova, Transnistria, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Croatia, Kuwait, Sierra Leone, Iraq, Lebanon and Ethiopia. Since April 7, 2014, the Ukrainian troops are involved in fighting in the east of Ukraine. Ground Forces of Ukraine, which include 4 expeditious commands: Northern, East, Western and Southern, and several types of military forces: the mechanized and tank troops, rocket troops and artillery, army aircraft, special troops, parts of the Balkan arms, parts of territorial defense, troops of air defense. Since August 5, 2019, the commander of Ground Forces of Ukraine is Alexander Syrsky. Air Forces of Ukraine include childbirth bombing, destructive assault, prospecting, transport aircraft and also anti-aircraft rocket and radio engineering troops. Landing and assault troops in 2012 were allocated in a separate type of military forces, carried a modern name since November 21, 2017. Are a part of DOB of the 25th Separate Air Crew. The place of dislocation: Uts, Guards and Petrovsk region. The 80th Separate Landing and Assault Crew, Lviv. The 95th Separate Landing and Assault Crew, Zhytomyr. The 79th Separate Landing and Assault Crew, Mykolaiv. 81 Separate Airmobile Crews, Donetsk region. The 45th Separate Landing and Assault Crew, Volred. The 46th Separate Landing and Assault Crew, Poltava. The 148th Separate Howitzer Self-Propelled and Artillery Division, the 199th Training Center and the 135th Detached Battalion of Management. Since August 21, 2019, the commander of landing and assault troops of Ukraine is Evgeny Moisyuk. The navies of Ukraine, which include Sea Command as a part of 6 divisions of various types of vessel, sea aircraft, command of marines, a part of providing and educational institutions. Since June 11, 2020, the commander of the Naval Forces of Ukraine is the Rear Admiral Alexei Leonidovich Nyspapa. The operational zone of Naval Forces of Seas of Ukraine includes water areas of the Black and Azov Seas, the Danube River, Dniester, Dnieper and also other areas of the seas which are defined by the interests of the state. According to the IMF, the 40th is in the world by the GDP size on PPS, $560 billion. 2019. On DDD on PPS per capita, Ukraine for 2018 takes the penultimate place among the countries of Europe, advancing only Moldova, and the 111th place in the world. By the Index of Global Competitiveness, GG.
In 2019, I took the 85th place in the world. In the country, the metallurgy, power. There are nuclear power plants and a cascade of hydroelectric power stations on Dnieper River. And also the chemical and mining industries. Coal mining ores are developed. The regions which are most developed economically: Kiev, Donetsk and Dnieper.
After the collapse of the USSR, since 1992 in the country the progressive deindustrialization which accepted total character in the field of high-tech productions and mechanical engineering took place. My 1999 DDD reached bottom, having been about 40% of the level of 1991.
Metallurgical, chemical and other power-consuming industries with the low surplus value fell into slightly best state. The active role of the state is characteristic of economy, at her market character. It owns about 140 large enterprises in various sectors of national economy and also controls the prices of a number of goods, including basic food and fuels and lubricants. In volume of DDD, the share of industrial production for 2011 makes 34.4%. Services sectors -56.2%, agriculture -9.4%. At the same time in the industry
18.5% are engaged in agriculture -15.8% and in services sector -65.7% of the working population.
Total number of able-bodied population -22.09 million people. The 30th place in the world. Unemployment rate -7%. The 81st place in the world. Ukraine is considered as export-focused country and, by some estimates, she receives 50% of VVV for the account of export. As for import, in 2011 according to the UTO, Ukraine took the 25th place among world importers. Without trade in the EU. Goods from shares in the global market in 0.6%. In 2011 the Forbes magazine placed Ukraine on the 4th place after Guinea in the rating of 10 worst economies of the world.
In the article it is noted that without watching that Ukraine has rich agricultural grounds and mineral resources, and can become the leading European economy, her DDD per capita is far behind even such countries as Serbia and Bulgaria.
The United States State Department notes such shortcomings as difficult laws and resolutions, bad corporate management, weak implementation of contract law by vessels and especially corruption. In 2010 DDD of Ukraine, by calculations of the World Bank, in a dollar equivalent was about 136 billion, 2011, about 163 billion, 2012, 175.8 billion, 2013, 183 billion, 2014, 133.5 billion, 2015, 90.6 billion. As of May 2019, Ukraine took the 64th place in the world ranking of ease of business. According to a joint research of the World Bank Group and PricewaterhouseCoopers of Paying Taxes 2020, Ukraine takes the 65th place in the rating of tax systems of the world. In Ukraine, 5 taxes, among which there are income tax and a labor tax. The total rate of taxes is 45.2%. As of 2019, the share of industrial production in structure of DDD made 21.6%, more than 60% of this volume are the share of the processing industries. Industrial development of Ukraine began in the 18th-19th centuries when here the foundation was laid for processing of agricultural products. However, the purposeful program of industrialization was deployed only at the end of the beginning of the 20th century. The most important article of export of Ukraine are the products of ferrous metallurgy, making nearly a half of export of the heavy industry. Chemical industry works in a uniform complex with metallurgy, using byproducts of metallurgy and the coke industry for production of nitrogen fertilizers, varnishes, paints, medicines. Phosphorites, salts of potassium and table salt are used for production of mineral fertilizers, is gray, for production of sulfuric acid. Oil and gas, both local and imported, are used for production of synthetic rubber and synthetic fibers. Main centers of production: cement industry,
Melikli, Amvrosivka, Dolbanov, Bakhasarai, Nikolov.
production of zavch, Kharkiv, Dnieper, Zaporizhzhia, Kryvyi Rih, Chernihiv, Kiev, Donetsk, Sokyriana, Kakhovka. Production of wall materials: Sumy, Kiev, Khmelnytskyi, Chernivtsi, Chernihiv. Glass industry:
Kiev, Stry, Konstantinovka, Lviv, Berezana, Buch.
porcelain and faience industry: Quarrystones, Korosten, Baranivka, Sumy. 8% of able-bodied population of the country are engaged in the food industry. As of 2003, the range of the made products includes more than 3,000 names. Forest resources of Ukraine are very limited, woodiness of the territory -14.3%.
The main massifs of the woods are concentrated in the Carpathians, Tupolesia, and in the mountains of the Crimea.
Valuable breeds of trees, a beech, an oak, a fir tree, a pine, and ash tree are widespread. The logging industry was created in the Carpathians and Tupolesia. 90% of all logging forests are exhausted by ruthless operation. A significant amount of the wood is imported from abroad. Problems of the industry are connected with fuller and rational use of waste of preparation, reproduction of the wood, improvement of an ecological situation.
It is placed quite evenly, but in areas a lesser habitat concentration of the enterprises is much higher.
Large centers: Lviv, Chernivtsi, Ivano-Frankivsk, Letsk, Zhytomyr, Chernihiv, Rakiv, Yesinya, Hust, Usharad, Mukachevo, Khostopol, Shostka. Outside zones a lesser habitat, in big industrial centers and transport hubs: Kiev, Donetsk, Kharkiv, Odessa, Cherkasy, Kherson. On imported raw materials the woodworking enterprises work. They make timber, wood shaving or watered. Kiev, Svolyava, outdoor. Plywood, matches. Furniture factories are mainly widespread in big cities, such as Kiev, Lviv, Odessa, Kharkiv. Placement of the enterprises of this industry is guided by raw material, water resources, existence of the electric power and the qualified labor. Automotive industry is presented by the plants Kraz in Kremenchuk, Luaz in the city of Lutsk and Zaz to Zaporizhzhia. After the collapse of the USSR in agriculture there came system crisis which negatively affected operational performance of the industry. To the middle of the old years crop production indicators on main types of products reached the level of 1990 or even surpassed them. At the same time, generally all livestock industry still couldn't restore former volumes. Ukraine has 32 million hectares of the Chernozem, that makes a third of arable lands of the whole Europe. The rent per hectare of the earth makes, as of 2013, 350 hryvnias, being one of the lowest in the world, that attracts many foreign agro-investors. The largest foreign tenants / owners of the Ukrainian Chernozem are New Century Holdings, 450,000 hectares, the USA; Kernel Holding SA, 405,000 hectares, Luxembourg; Maria Agro Holding Public Limited, 298,000 hectares, Cyprus; Renaissance Group, 250,000 hectares, Russia; and Sintel Agriculture PLE, 146.8 thousand hectares, Cyprus. Services sector traditionally took insufficiently important place in the Ukrainian economy, including the period of the USSR. The beginning of her intensive purposeful development belongs to 1990, to the old years. By 2011, the services sector share in DDD made 56.2%. She provided employment of 2/3, 65.7%, of able-bodied population. The credit and financial system of Ukraine, having endured exclusively heavy shocks during crisis of 1997-1998, in general, it was stabilized in the first half of the old years. In 2005, the National Bank of Ukraine, NBU, deployed the long-term program directed to minimization of number of the private banking institutions operating in the country, in particular, due to merge of the smallest of them and absorption small by larger.
About influence and consequences of the global economic crisis of the end of the order for the banking sector of Ukraine, see an article The Economic Crisis in Ukraine,
2008-2009. Unlike negative results of 2009-2011, the loss for 2009 made 38.45 billion WA, for 2010, 13 billion WA, for 2011, 7.7 billion WA.
In 9 months 2012, the banking system of Ukraine showed the positive financial result equal to plus 2.775 billion WA.
Ukraine is rich with tourist opportunities. Carpathians, historical monuments of the ancient Ukrainian cities, rural, marine, tourism and nature reserves.
In the territory of Ukraine there are following objects entered in the UNESCO World Cultural Heritage List.
Street, Sofia Cathedral and the related monastery buildings, Kiev Pekarsk Lavra and Church of Xavier on Berstav, Kiev. Historic center of Lviv, Lviv. Points of Struve Geodetic Arc, Virgin Beach and forests of the Carpathians, Residence Bukovina Metropolitans, Chernivtsi. Wooden churches of the Carpathian region. Ukraine is the exporter of the electric power. According to the State Enterprise of Foreign Economic Activity Ukrinterenergo, in 2012 Ukraine exported 9.745 billion each electric power.
Our main buyers are Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, Romania and Moldova.
Ukraine buys 100% of nuclear fuel abroad. The main supplier of ready heat generating assemblies is the Russian corporation, Tvel. The most part of fuel for Ukraine is made by Tvel of the Ukrainian uranium raw materials. Since 2011 on the South Ukrainian nuclear power plant on the second and third power units fuel assemblies of Westinghouse are partially used.
In 2004, four Ukrainian nuclear power plants produced 53.2% of the electric power in the country.
By 2030 Ukraine is going to construct 9 new atomic power units and 2 more blocks will be in different stages of construction. At the same time Kyiv on the Ukrainian nuclear power plants 0.71 in 2011 is significantly lower than on Russian 0.82. Increase in Kyiv at least to reached on the Russian nuclear power plants is equivalent to construction of 2 new power units. In Ukraine there is also one invalid NPP, the Chernobyl NPP, since December 15, 2000 is taken out of service. All Ukrainian nuclear power plants were equipped with reactors of the Russian production for -440, for -1000 and RBEMK -1000.
On the Zaporizhzhia NPP, the dry storage of the fulfilled nuclear fuel
DFF, which began the work in August 2001 when on the second power unit of the station loading of the fulfilled heat generating collections in the first many placed tight basket was begun is built.
The design volume of Choet on the Zaporizhzhia NPP -380 containers that will provide storage of the fulfilled fuel assemblies which will be withdrawn from reactors during all term of operation of the station. In December 2005 the State Atomic Energy Company Energoatom signed the contract with the American company Holtec International for design and construction of storage of the fulfilled nuclear fuel of dry type.
Its storage will be used for storage of the fulfilled nuclear fuel from the others, Rivne, Southern Ukrainian and Khmelnytskyi, nuclear power plants of Ukraine which is taken out to Russia so far. In 2010 the resource of the first power unit of the Rivne NPP is prolonged for 20 years. In 2011 works on extension of a resource of the second power unit of the Rivne NPP and the first power unit of the Southern Ukrainian nuclear power plant are conducted.
The volume of foreign trade in 2011 was $140.3 billion at negative balance of $13.7 billion.
Export volume -63. $3 billion, import $77 billion. On import the 38th, on export the 51st place in the world. The main articles of export are electric equipment, textiles, wood, plywood. According to the World Bank in 2012 the country took the 8th place in the world on export of wheat. 4.1 million tons. Mainly energy carriers, machines and the equipment, products of chemical industry and oil processing are imported. The main consumers of the Ukrainian export were on a state for 2014. Russia 18.2% of total amount. Turkey 6.6%. Egypt 5.3%. China 5%. Poland 4.9%. And main importers of Ukraine: Russia 23.3%. China 10%. Germany 9.9%. Belarus 7.3%. Poland 5.6%.
The volume of direct foreign investments in the Ukrainian economy for 2011 is about $60.5 billion.
The 52nd place in the world. The Ukrainian investors abroad placed more than $3 billion. The 65th place in the world. Ukraine has free trade agreements with a number of the states and the organizations, including within the CIS since September 2012. Validity between Russia and Ukraine is mutually suspended by and within association with the European Union since June 27, 2014, negotiations on signing of similar contracts with Serbia, Turkey, Lebanon, Vietnam, Morocco, Syria, Indonesia and People's Republic of China are also conducted. The share of the sector of transport and communication in gross domestic product of Ukraine, according to Goskomstat, as of 2009 made 11.3%. The number of employees of the industry is 7% of the total number of the busy population. The advantageous geographical location of Ukraine causes passing through it the international transport corridors. Extent of the Ukrainian roads is about km. The network of the main routes is widespread on the whole country and connects all large cities and also provides cross-border routes with neighboring countries. The majority of the Ukrainian roads wasn't updated from Soviet period and now are outdated. More than 90% of the roads existing in Ukraine are operated with excessive standard service life. In the rating of quality of highways in the countries of the world made by the World Economic Forum, Ukraine in 2018 took the 123rd place from 140 possible. Among the countries of Europe, Ukraine took the penultimate place, having outstripped only Moldova. The international airports in Kiev, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Vinnytsia, Mariupol. Since 2009 doesn't make regular flights. Since 2014 activity is stopped. Because of armed conflict in the east of Ukraine, the airport is preserved. Lviv, Odessa and Chernivtsi, Zaporizhzhia work. The aviation sector in Ukraine develops very quickly. It is promoted by a visa-free regime for citizens of a number of the countries. Besides, the football Euro-2012 tournament induced the government to invest heavily in construction of new terminals of the airports in Donetsk, Lviv and Kiev. Ukraine has a number of airlines, the largest of which is the International Airlines of Ukraine.
According to official figures, about 7% of the population of Ukraine use services of airlines that is connected with a low share of the middle class in the country.
In the rating of effectiveness of services of air transport in the countries of the world made by the World Economic Forum, Ukraine in 2018 took the 94th place from 140 possible, lagging behind the majority of neighboring countries.
Moldova, Romania, Hungary, Poland, Russia. Railway transport began to develop actively at the end of the 19th century. The first railroad is paved in 1861. As of 2009, the extent of railway tracks is 22300 km, the 7th place in the world.
The electrified railroads of 9752 km.
As the national standard, the track 1520 wide is accepted. For development of a railway system, the same regional disproportions as are characteristic of road.
Now the state has monopoly for granting passenger railway transport, and all trains, except cooperating with other foreign companies on the international routes, are under authority of the Ukrsnitsia Company. The water transport, generally river, provides passenger services on Dnieper, Danube, Pripyat and their inflows. In the majority of the large cities there are river ports. The international voyages it is carried out mainly through the port of Odessa, from where ferries regularly float to Istanbul, Varna and Haifa. Length of river navigable ways -1672 km. Dnieper River and Danube, important ways of transportation of the international freights. The main ports at the Black and Azov Seas, the Odessa port, Ilyachevsk, the port of Yushny, Kherson, Nikolaev and Mariupol. In total in 2008 goods turnover of all ports made 132.18 million tons.
Considerable transit capacity of Ukraine allows to develop export of services, which in 2009 reached $9.5 billion.
In the general structure of export of services, transport services make 66%, in structure of import -19%, thanks to what transport of Ukraine shows steady positive balance of foreign trade in services. The huge Black Sea Shipping Company, created in 1833 and prospering during the Soviet period, was sold out during doubtful transactions, including on scrap metal, and today practically stopped the existence. From 350 vessels remain 6. In Ukraine there is a developed network oil and gas pipelines. 20070 and 4540 km respectively, and also 4170 km of pipelines for the clean products. In the territory of Ukraine in Kiev there was first in the Russian Empire tram. 1892. And the first in world practice the trolleybus train of inventors Vladimir Veklich. 1966. On December 30, 1978 in Kiev the USSR's first line of the high-speed tram, constructed at the initiative of 5. Veklich and 5. Diakonov was open. As of 2019 the subway is in Kiev, Kharkiv and Dnieper. In 55 cities of Ukraine trolleybuses and trams are successfully operated. On extent of providing the population with means of communication, Ukraine is in the highest group of the moderately developed countries. However, in the odd years high positive dynamics, in particular in the field of the internet, was characteristic of this sector. The telephone country code, +380. Very quickly also access for the population to the internet extends. In national internet domain, UO. As of June 30, 2019, 40.9 million internet users are registered. That makes 93.4% of population. The national healthcare system was fully influenced by consequences of the collapse of the USSR.
By the beginning of the odd years the government deployed the large-scale program for restoration and further increase in its efficiency, which key element is installation on decentralization, transfer of the maximum responsibility for ensuring medical and sanitary service to the regional authorities.
Within this program, in particular, in structure of the Ministry of Health, the special divisions responsible for work in regions are founded powers and, respectively, financial security of the health services operating within provincial and district administrations are considerably expanded.
In particular, under the authority of the provincial and district authorities there are hospitals, polyclinics and profile clinics.
Medical infrastructure at the grassroots level extends. By the end of the old years in each area there was at least one medical center headed by the diplomate doctor whose personnel could render medical aid not less than in 8 directions. Besides the main medical center, several so-called auxiliary first aid posts headed, as a rule, by the paramedic or the nurse work in the majority of areas. The regional medical center is usually equipped at least with one vehicle for delivery of health care on departure. At the lowest administrative level, in villages and settlements. See the section, Administrative Territorial Division.
Besides possible auxiliary first aid posts, without fail there are rural obstetric points, not less than one in every one.
And also the so-called joint service stations, which are responsible for rendering the simplest medical services and vaccination.
For the last decades, the regional centers of Ukraine were equipped with the modern diagnostic equipment, which basis is made by magnetic and resonant tomographs, and also the modern equipment for radiation therapy.
Linear particle accelerators.
Fryazov became the founder of magnetic resonance imaging and radioneurosurgery in Ukraine.
In general, one doctor is the share of 3472 persons of the population, one hospital bed of 1667 people. Access to quality drinking water has 80% of the population, including 89% of city and 71% rural. To modern sanitary conveniences, minus 52% of the population, 67% of city and 36% rural. The Constitution of the country guarantees to all citizens access to free education. Senior secondary education is obligatory. Among high schools, suppressing the majority is state. The public expenditures on education make 2.8% of GDP. For 2008, the 139th place in the world. As of 2011, in the country there are 83 state and about 300 private universities.
Leaders among them are
Kiev National University of Taras Shevchenko, Nationalny Technical University of Ukraine, Kiev Polytechnical Institute, Kyivo-Mogilyansky Academy, Kiev National Trade and Economic University. The education system consists of educational institutions, scientific and methodical institutions, the scientific and production enterprises, the state and local governing bodies of education, and self-government in the field of education. The system of preschool education includes network of preschool educational institutions, scientific and methodical institutions, governing bodies of education, family.
In the direction of formation of network of educational institutions, the state guarantees constitutional right for each citizen on availability and free of charge receiving full general secondary education. The network of general educational institutions is formed taking into account a demographic, ethnic and social and economic situation on educational levels.
According to educational level, general educational institutions are of degree. Elementary school. Function. The 2 degrees. Main school. The 3 degrees. High school. General educational institutions of all 3 degrees can function as integrated or independently. Training at high comprehensive school begins with 6 or 7 year age.
Vocational training is carried out on the basis of full general secondary education or basic general secondary education with granting an opportunity to get senior secondary education. In the system of professional educational institutions, three-level professional education is carried out. Each extent of training is defined by theoretical and practical completeness and is fixed by assignment to graduates of the corresponding qualification.
Graduates of the lowest degree at own will can continue training at the highest. Training of workers in State 932 in 2007-2008 academic year is carried out by 530 working professions.
There is also a network of private professional educational institutions which also are in the sphere of vocational training and contain 798 educational institutions with the contingent of 100,000 people who receive vocational training by 179 working professions. The average indicator of employment of graduates of the state used by the received profession across Ukraine in 2006-2007 academic year is 86%.
The higher education is carried out on the basis of full general secondary education. In the higher educational institutions which are carrying out training of junior experts, the persons having the basic general secondary education can be accepted. In May 2005, Ukraine joined Bologna process at the Conference of Ministers of the European countries in Bergen. As the participant of Bologna process, Ukraine has to solve a number of the paramount key problems, providing introduction by 2010 of standards, recommendations and the main tools of the European space of the higher education. National frame of qualifications, innovative European credit and transfer system, annexed to the diploma of the European sample. The country has the developed network of the scientific organizations, the largest among which is the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. The Ukrainian culture throughout the long periods of the history developed as national. In her folklore and national traditions figured prominently. Especially brightly it was shown in art, national thoughts, songs, dances, arts and crafts. Exactly, thanks to preservation and continuation of traditions which roots go back to the culture of Kievan Rus' rise in the Ukrainian culture and in the 16th, 17th centuries, and cultural revival in the 19th century became possible. At the same time, also negative consequences of such nature of development of the Ukrainian national culture are notable. For a long time there are a lot of talented people who were born and grew up in Ukraine, then left it, connected the further life and creativity with the Russian, Polish and other cultures. Besides, progress in the field of natural sciences was expressed more weakly than in humanitarian. At the same time, an original and ancient education system which reached the blossoming during the Cossacks and provided almost continuous literacy of the population, long tradition of Anigopasana, focus on the leading centers of Europe, in particular, on the Byzantine cultural traditions, a role of the Western Russia as center of sciences and higher education thanks to the developed network of Collegium Ostrowski and Kievo-Mogyliansky Academy. Patronage and the state support of culture by a number of outstanding statesmen. K. Ostrowski, P. Konachevishim Sagidakny 1. Mazepa, etc. All this allowed to lift the Ukrainian culture to world level, to create a number of classical masterpieces in the field of publishing, architecture, literatures, to achieve considerable success in science. The famous researcher of the Ukrainian culture 1.
Ogienko noted that the Ukrainian culture were from the very beginning inherent openness in the world, lack of xenophobia and humanity.
The system of values of this culture during her active development. The 17th-19th century was quite specific. Rich material for such conclusion gives creative heritage of frying pans F. Prokopovich P. Kulish T. Shevchenko. In the philosophical compositions they resolved an issue of essence and conditions of human happiness, of sense of human existence.
The first literary monuments in the territory of Ukraine go back to an era of Kievan Rus and were written in the Old Slavic language, which was the only thing official in Russia. In particular, as some of the first are considered the chronicle, story of temporary years, and the heroic poem, Tale of Igor's Campaign.
The first books written in the West Russian written language scientists date back to the 16th century. That in the 16th century it was written, Lexis with is interpreted simply, where only Romancy in West Russian is given. An outstanding monument of West Russian is the Prysupnitsky Gospel, handwritten in 1556-1561. Within the 15th-18th centuries literature in Latin is created. The original phenomenon of medieval literature are Ion Vishensky, Meletius Matritsky, Feofan Prokopovich's polemic works, etc. Top of old Ukrainian literature of the period of Baroque, works of the poet and philosopher Grigory Skovoroda. 1722-1794. The Russian Socrates traveled around Ukraine and the countries of Central Europe closer to recognize people. For G. Skovoroda's philosophy happiness problem, which was thought of him through disclosure of the divine essence of the person, identification of talent put in her by God, ensuring functioning on calling was through. The words of the philosopher, the world caught me, but didn't catch, which he bequeathed to rap out on the grave, became one more evidence of devotion of G. Skovoroda of spiritual life before terrestrial vanity and vanity.
At present such large associations as work at Ukraine.
National Writers' Union of Ukraine.
Ukrainian Inter-Regional Writers' Union.
Congress of Writers of Ukraine. Association of the Ukrainian Writers. Fine Arts. Historically, the earliest type of the fine arts which extended in Ukraine is the sculpture. The most ancient of the remained sculptural images treat the 7th century. As during this period, and later in a sculpture the religious subject dominated, however also purely household plots were reflected. Formation of National School of Painting happened in the 19th century under the Russian and Austrian influence. To start the 20th century, strengthening of the realistic direction in painting is characteristic. Since this period, more and more noticeable is an appeal to nationalist, patriotic plots.
As well as for literature, rather high ideological bias and the appeal to hot social topics and the humanistic ideas are characteristic of painting of the Soviet period, while for the followed stage, sharp ideologization. Folk Ukrainian music various on genres also includes the calendar and family and ceremonial songs, songs of serf and soldier's life, historical songs which are carried out to the accompaniment of a kobza or a bandura, and also powerful layer of instrumental music which includes as ensemble playing music.
Trosty music. And uses various wind instruments. Pipe. String. violin, and percussions, tambourine, tools, and shepherd's folk tunes. Especially original tools of the west of Ukraine, a Jew's harp, a trembeta.
And the present the folk music keeps initial conditions of the existing only in the western regions, however national songs became property of professional and amateur collectives across all Ukraine and sound in an authentic look. Ensembles, Tree, Lord, Bashichi, Batya.
In the form of the processings. National Chorus of the Rope. A chapel of bandura players of Mayboroda. Entering in academic. Evany Stankovic. And various directions of popular music. Vopli Vodopliasova, the Ocean Elzy, Tartic, Ruslana. Early forms of theatrics go back to the dramatized actions of national holidays and cult ceremonies.
At least since the 15th century there is a baletka and a dan.
The first movies were shot in Ukraine in the 1920th years.
In 2007 for support and development of the best samples of classical modern poetry and also revival of the best traditions of the independent art and documentary film of Ukraine at the Chestnut House Festival, the award was created and founded by him.
And A. Tarkovsky. Each national kitchen is influenced first of all by a structure of the place where cook food, that is a home. In Ukraine I was such place, the Verest, a campfire of the closed type. Therefore Ukrainian cuisine generally uses methods of cooking, suppression and baking. Even Cossacks, having hit a game, tried to cook from its soup. Broth. But not to roast on a spit that is more peculiar to Germans, for example. It is used both meat of pets and fowl, fish. Its very used product in Ukrainian cuisine serves lard in all types. His use is extremely various. Fat is eaten crude, salty, smoked, fried and is a fatty basis of many dishes of mainly festive kitchen. In lard, as a rule, everyone not pork forgiving of juiciness to him, fray with garlic and salt, receiving nutritious weight for sandwiches. Among vegetable food first place was won from time immemorial by bread, and as in ferment, and fresh in the form of dumplings, unleavened bread with poppy and honey. Also did not only flour, but also different grain from which cooked a kolivo of wheat.
In the 11th-12th century from Asia to Ukraine delivered a buckwheat of which began to do flour and grain.
In Ukrainian cuisine there were grechnik, buckwheat pampushkas with garlic, buckwheat dumplings with fat and other dishes.
Used also millet, rice.
Since the 14th century. And bean cultures, such as peas, haricot, lentil, beans and others. Favorite type of the test at Ukrainians is fresh, which there are several different types, and for confectionery, sand. On the second place, garden and wild vegetables and fruit.
Carrots, beet, radish, cucumbers, pumpkin, horseradish, fennel, caraway seeds, ananas, mint, kalgan, apples, cherries, plums, a cranberry, cowberry, raspberry. Here not the full list of the vegetation consumed very widely.
The honey played a noticeable role in food as sugar for the time was absent.
For preparation also used different types of animal fats and vegetable oils, vinegar and nuts.
over time from Central Asia to Ukraine delivered a mulberry tree, mulberry, and watermelons from America, and widely to eat corn, tomatoes and siliculose pepper which began to grow up in the south of Ukraine.
The main hot food are fish and meat broths with addition of vegetables under the general name soup, that in Russian was transformed later to the word fish soup. The originality of Ukrainian cuisine is expressed in primary use of such products as beet, lard, wheat flour, and also in the so-called combined thermal treatment of a large number of products. The Ukrainian borscht, a typical example of that. One add 20 more components which shade to beet and develop her taste. Among ancient Ukrainian drinks, the maoda received by way of natural fermentation, beer, kivas, uzvara. In the 14th century vodka, gorka, appeared. On its basis to numerous tinctures. By a handicraft way in Ukraine do moonshine on the basis of sugar and various sugary products, fruit, vegetables, berries. The Veronuka, hot alcoholic drink on the basis of gorilka or moonshine, honey and spices is widespread. For a long time in the territory of modern Ukraine, winemaking, originally, is widespread only in the Crimea, then in other southern areas of the country.
The Crimea, which wines became world famous in the 19th century thanks to Lev Sergeyevich Golitsyn's efforts, was the main winemaking area of Ukraine until recently.
Certain fame was also gained by the Ukrainian brandy, by the Soviet tradition called cognac. The first periodicals in Ukrainian appeared in Ukraine at the beginning of the 20th century, however printing Massachusetts media gained broad development only after 1917. Characteristic feature of the Ukrainian Massachusetts media is the bilingualism. The products are turned out as in Ukrainian, so in Russian languages. However, many popular editions sell only Russian-speaking materials. Besides, because of poor development of the market of advertising, most the Ukrainian media companies are dependent on support of sponsors.
According to the Reporters Without Borders organization for 2010 in Ukraine, frequent violation of freedom of the press, since coming to power of Viktor Yanukovych, and also threat of media pluralism because of the conflicts of interests of sponsors and journalists is observed. The lion's share of the Ukrainian media market is occupied by television. The television enterprises are divided into national, private and mixed. The National TV Company of Ukraine, to the second Saint, the new channel, IKT, 5 the channel TV, and to the third Inter TV and 1+1 belongs to the first category. The last two companies have the greatest audience.
The market of telecommunications in Ukraine in 2009 grew by 0.5%
to $6 billion, or about 6% of TDD. 87.1% in revenue breakdown of the companies were made by a mobile and fixed telephony. Popular printing editions in Ukraine are national newspapers, Fakty I Kommentary, Sagodnya, Den, Sokola Nedeli, Kolos Ukraini, and also the Correspondent magazine. The absolute majority of the press in Ukraine is published in Russian. Short-lived were Ukrainian editions, Esquire, National Geographic, and Men's Health. They were closed at the end of 2014. The largest radio stations are the National Radio Company of Ukraine, Radio Svoboda, Deutsche Welle, the Ukrainian service BBC, and Entertaining Europe Plus, FM Hit.
The state news agency Ukrinform, public news agency union and branch of the Russian Interfax, Interfax Ukraine work at the market of news in Ukraine. Two Ukrainian revolutions and also development of the internet created conditions for emergence of influential social and political internet Massachusetts media.
Among the first there was a newspaper Ukrainian Pravda based by Georgy Gongadze in 2000 The Censor. Isn't Present and Espresso TV received the audience during the Euromaidan. Then it was based by Gromatsk, the initiative of the famous Ukrainian journalist supported by NQ. As of the end of 2014 in Ukraine 50% of the population used the internet. Data of ANO. Social networks remain the most popular factors of use of the internet among Ukrainians. The most active users of network, youth. The most popular social network is Facebook. She is followed by VKontakte and schoolmates. Ukrainians prefer to Yandex of Google. Portals, Akka, Net, Meta, U.
Torrent trackers, online stores and online banking are also very popular.
Distribution among Ukrainians of the European sports began at the beginning of the 20th century. The authorities of independent Ukraine, as a rule, attached great value to development and promoting of sport, implementing the appropriate state programs, in particular, through structures of the Ministry of Youth and Sports.
By the 21st century, practically all summer sports, both male and female disciplines in a varying degree gained distribution in the country.
At the Summer Olympic Games of 2012 the team of Ukraine won 6 gold, 5 silver and 9 bronze medals. In 2019 the soccer national team of Ukraine. Up to 20 years.
Won the FIFA World Cup among youth teams of 2019, having won a strong-willed victory over team of South Korea with the score 3-1 and thus for the first time became the world champion.
In 2016 the beach soccer national team of Ukraine won the annual European Beach Soccer Championship, having beaten in the final Portugal with the score 2-1.
In 2009 the youthful soccer national team of Ukraine. Up to 19 years. Beat in the final England with the score 2-0, thus for the first time having won the European Cup at the House European Championship.
In 2009 Donetsk Shakhtar in the UEFA Cup final in Istanbul beat the Bremen Werder with the score 2-1.
The soccer, single combats, motorcycle sport, chess are among the most popular disciplines among the population. The largest stadium, Kiev Olympic. Multipurpose, on 70,000 viewers. Donbas Arena. Football, on 50,000 viewers. Was the second largest Donetsk, but during armed conflict it sustained serious damage and on competitions aren't held. Also far. Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.